They say when death comes calling in the desert, it doesn't knock, it just takes. But sometimes, when a man lives by a code stronger than his own survival, the desert gives back more than it steals. When Rex Ironside Castellano watched Flight 447 spiral into the Sonoran wasteland, he thought his story was over. He didn't know that walking 100 miles through hell would make him a legend. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra, special for you. The morning of March 15th started like any other for Rex Castellano. The Arizona sun was already blazing through his apartment window in Tucson when he rolled out of bed, his Bone Valley MC patch hanging on the chair where he'd left it the night before. At 34, Rex had lived more hard miles than most men twice. His age, the leather vest with its distinctive BV patch and rocker wasn't just clothing, it was identity, brotherhood, and a code that ran deeper than blood. His father, Miguel Castellano, had died 3 months earlier. Not in some blaze of glory or dramatic fashion, but quietly in a hospital bed, lung cancer claiming another victim of 40 years working construction sites. Rex had been holding his father's weathered hand when Miguel whispered his final words. "Mijo, you live by the code, you die by the code, but sometimes the code asks you to live for others." Rex hadn't understood what his father meant then. He would soon enough. The flight to Phoenix was supposed to be routine, a quick business trip to settle his father's estate with some lawyers who'd been dragging their feet. Rex rarely flew. Hell's Angels preferred the feel of chrome and asphalt beneath them, but sometimes life demanded compromises, and this was one of them. He'd booked the earliest flight on Desert Sky Airlines, a small regional carrier that operated twin-engine Cessnas between Arizona's smaller cities. Flight 447 was a cramped 12-seater with worn blue fabric seats and the faint smell of aviation fuel that never quite left small planes. Rex took a seat near the back, his leather jacket drawing curious glances from the other passengers. There was Lisa Park, a young teacher heading to a conference in Phoenix, nervously clutching a stack of papers. Captain Ray Sullivan, a veteran, a pilot with silver hair and calm eyes, gave Rex a respectful nod during pre-flight. In the middle rows sat a handful of business travelers and an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary with a trip to see their grandchildren. Rex pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to Dutch Reaper Hawkins, the president of Bone Valley MC. "Wheels up. Back tonight for church meeting." The response came quickly. "Ride safe, brother. Dessert's got teeth today." Rex looked out the small window as the plane taxied down the runway. The Sonoran desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a vast expanse of saguaro cacti, rocky outcroppings, and sand that could kill a man in hours if he wasn't prepared. The mountains rose like ancient sentinels in the distance, their peaks sharp against the cloudless sky. It was beautiful and merciless in equal measure. 20 minutes into the flight, Captain Sullivan's voice crackled over the intercom with professional calm. "Folks, we're experiencing some minor engine trouble. Nothing to worry about, but we'll need to make an unscheduled landing in Yuma as a precaution." Rex felt the plane shudder slightly, then heard a sound that made his blood run cold, the unmistakable grinding of metal on metal. Lisa Park gasped, her papers scattering to the floor. The elderly man reached for his wife's hand. Rex's instincts, honed by years of riding dangerous roads and living on the edge, told him this wasn't minor. The plane lurched suddenly to the left, and through his window, Rex saw black smoke streaming from the port engine. Captain Sullivan's voice returned, tighter now, but still controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats and prepare for an emergency landing. Flight attendant, initiate emergency procedures." The next few minutes blurred together in a chaos of grinding engines, desperate prayers, and the acrid smell of burning oil. Rex watched the desert floor rushing up to meet them, calculating angles. and impact zones the way he'd learned to read dangerous curves on mountain highways. The plane was coming in too fast, too steep, and there was nothing but rocks and sand below. "Brace for impact!" Captain Sullivan shouted. Rex Castellano had faced down rival gangs, survived high-speed chases, and walked through fire for his brothers. But as Flight 447 slammed into the Sonoran desert at 120 miles per hour, cartwheeling across the sand in a shower of sparks and twisted metal, he knew this was different. This was the desert demanding its due. The world went black. When Rex opened his eyes, the sun was a merciless hammer against his skull, and the taste of blood and aviation fuel filled his mouth. His left shoulder screamed with pain, and something warm was trickling down his forehead, but he was alive, which was more than he'd expected 30 seconds ago. The plane, what was left of it, lay scattered across 50 yards of desert floor. The fuselage had split in half, the wings torn away, and debris glittered in the sand like deadly confetti. Rex pulled himself from his seat, his leather jacket torn but his spine intact. Years of motorcycle accidents had taught him to assess damage quickly. Possible concussion, dislocated shoulder, cuts and bruises, but nothing that would kill him in the next hour. The other passengers weren't so lucky. Captain Sullivan was unconscious, but breathing, pinned in the cockpit by twisted metal. Lisa Park was crying but alert, her leg bent at an unnatural angle. The elderly couple. Rex closed his eyes and said a brief prayer for their souls. 3 others were unconscious. Their conditions uncertain. In the span of 60 seconds, Rex had gone from passenger to sole able-bodied survivor. The reality hit him like a physical blow. They were at least 20 miles from the nearest road, maybe more. No cell service, no water except what might be salvaged from the wreckage, and the desert temperature was already climbing toward 110 degrees. Rex looked at the injured survivors, then at the endless expanse of sand and rock stretching in every direction. His father's voice echoed in his memory. Sometimes the code asks you to live for others. He understood now. Rex Castellano, Bone Valley Hell's Angel, was going to walk out of this desert, not just to save himself, but to bring help back for people who would die without it, even if it killed him in the process. The Brotherhood Code demanded nothing less. The first rule of desert survival that Miguel had taught Rex during their hunting trips was simple: inventory everything, panic about nothing. Rex forced himself to move methodically through the wreckage, his boots crunching on broken glass and twisted aluminum. Every step sent fire through his dislocated shoulder, but pain was just information. And right now, information was keeping them all alive. Captain Sullivan was trapped but stable, his pulse steady despite the blood trickling from a head wound. "Water," he whispered when Rex reached him. "Passengers, how many?" "Working on it, Captain," Rex replied, his voice rougher than he'd expected. He'd found Lisa Park conscious but in shock, her broken leg already swelling in the desert heat. She kept asking about her students, about the conference, her mind struggling to process the transition from routine flight to survival scenario. Of the 12 people who'd boarded Flight 447, 6 were dead. Rex had seen enough violence in his life to recognize when someone was beyond help, and he didn't waste time on false hope. The elderly couple had died on impact, quick and clean, which was more mercy than the desert usually offered. 3 business travelers had succumbed to their injuries within the first hour, their bodies already growing cold in the shade of the broken fuselage. That left Rex, Captain Sullivan, Lisa, and 2 other passengers. Marcus Webb, a rancher who'd been heading to Phoenix for cattle auctions, and Elena Santos, a social worker returning from a family visit. Marcus had internal injuries that Rex couldn't diagnose, but knew were serious. The man's breathing was shallow, his skin growing paler by the minute. Elena was unconscious, with what looked like a severe concussion, but her vital signs were strong. Rex salvaged what he could from the wreckage: 4 bottles of water from the service cart, a first aid kit, some snacks, and the emergency radio that had been damaged in the crash. He tried the radio for 20 minutes, adjusting frequencies and checking connections, but got nothing but static. The plane's emergency beacon might be working. There was no way to tell. But even if it was, search and rescue could take days to locate them in this vast emptiness. The sun was climbing toward its merciless peak, and the temperature inside the broken fuselage was already becoming unbearable. Rex dragged the survivors into the shadow of the largest piece of wreckage, using seat cushions and debris to create what shelter he could. He rationed the water carefully, small sips every hour, just enough to prevent dehydration without depleting their meager supply too quickly. "How bad is it?" Captain Sullivan asked during a lucid moment. The pilot's eyes were clear despite his injuries, and Rex recognized the look of a man who understood hard truths. Rex glanced at the other survivors, then leaned closer. "Bad. We've got water for maybe 2 days if we're careful. Food for less. And that's assuming rescue finds us." Sullivan nodded grimly. "Emergency beacon might be transmitting, but we're way off course from where they'll start looking. Could be a week before search teams get out this far." "These folks don't have a week," Rex said quietly. It was then that Rex made the decision that would define the rest of his life. He'd grown up hearing stories from the older Bone Valley members about the code that bound them together, not just loyalty to each other, but responsibility to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. His father had lived by that code, even outside the club. It's what had made Miguel spend his weekends volunteering at the community center, teaching kids to fix engines and avoid the mistakes he'd made in his youth. "I'm walking out," Rex announced to the conscious survivors. "Nearest road is maybe 20 miles south. I can make that in a day if I push hard." Lisa's eyes widened with panic. "You can't leave us here." "I'm not leaving you," Rex said firmly. "I'm going to get help. But I need to go now, while I still have strength and daylight to navigate." He began stripping unnecessary weight from his leather jacket, keeping only the essentials. His wallet, keys, and cell phone went into his boots, useless now, but habit. Died hard. He tore strips from a seat cover to fashion a makeshift sling for his shoulder and wrapped his knuckles with tape from the first aid kit. Desert walking would shred his hands if he wasn't careful. Captain Sullivan struggled to sit up. "Son, that's rough country out there. Rattlesnakes, mountain lions, flash flood zones, and the heat." He trailed off, but Rex understood. The desert had killed better men than him with far better preparation. "Captain, my dad used to say that sometimes you don't get to choose your battles, they choose you." Rex adjusted his boots and checked the angle of the sun. "This is my battle now." Rex filled 1 water bottle and left the rest with the survivors. He marked their location as best he could, piling rocks in an arrow pattern that would be visible from the air. Then he knelt beside each of the injured, making promises he wasn't sure he could keep. To Lisa, "Help is coming. Stay in the shade and keep that leg elevated." To Marcus, "You're tougher than this desert, brother. Hold on." To Elena, still unconscious, "Your family's waiting for you. Don't give up." And to Captain Sullivan, "Keep them alive until I get back." "That's an order." The pilot managed a weak smile. "Yes, sir, Sergeant Castellano." Rex paused at the edge of the wreckage and looked back one last time. 5 people were counting on him to do something that might be impossible. But as he faced the endless expanse of sand and sagebrush stretching toward the horizon, he felt something he hadn't experienced since his father's death. Purpose. The sun was directly overhead now, a blazing furnace that turned the air itself into an enemy. Rex pulled his jacket over his head to create shade and began walking south, toward what he hoped was salvation. Each step took him further from the crash site and deeper into country that could kill him in a dozen different ways. Behind him, the wreckage of Flight 447 grew smaller until it disappeared entirely in the heat shimmer. Ahead lay 20 miles of the most unforgiving landscape in North America. Rex Ironside Castellano, Bone Valley Hell's Angel, had just begun the walk of his life. The first mile nearly broke him. Rex had underestimated how much the crash had taken out of him. His dislocated shoulder sent lightning bolts of agony down his arm with every step, and the concussion made the horizon shimmer and dance in ways that had nothing to do with heat mirages. But he kept walking, one boot in front of the other, because 5 people were counting on him to do the impossible. The Sonoran desert showed no mercy to the unprepared. The temperature had climbed past 115 degrees, turning the air into a furnace that seared his lungs with every breath. The sun wasn't just hot, it was malevolent, a burning eye that seemed to focus its hatred on anything foolish enough to challenge it at midday. Rex pulled his leather jacket over his head like a makeshift hood, grateful for once for the heavy material that usually trapped heat on summer rides. By the second mile, his water bottle was already half empty. Every instinct screamed at him to drink more, but Miguel's voice echoed in his memory from their hunting expeditions. The desert tricks you, mijo, makes you think you need more water than you do. Sip slow, breathe through your nose, and trust your body to find its rhythm. Rex found that rhythm somewhere around mile 3. His legs settled into a steady pace that ate up ground without burning through his reserves too quickly. He followed animal trails when he could find them, deer paths and javelina runs that curved around the worst obstacles. The desert wildlife knew how to move efficiently through this landscape, and Rex was smart enough to learn from them. The terrain was a nightmare of contradictions. Soft sand that grabbed at his boots and sapped his strength alternated with sections of hardpan so solid it jarred his spine with every step. Cholacacti reached out with arms covered in barbed spines, waiting to snag clothing or skin. Palo Verde trees offered tantalizing patches of shade, but Rex couldn't afford to stop. Not yet, not while the sun was still climbing. It was during mile 4 that the memories started coming back. Not the recent ones of the crash or his father's and death, but older memories from his early days in Bone Valley, MC. He'd been barely 21 when Dutch Reaper Hawkins had sponsored him into the club, a kid with too much anger and not enough direction. The other members had tested him in a dozen ways, but it was during his prospect period that Rex had learned what brotherhood really meant. There had been a night, almost 10 years ago, when a rival club had jumped Tommy Wrench Martinez outside a bar in Riverside. Tommy was outnumbered 4-1, bleeding in an alley while his attackers prepared to finish him off with tire irons and chains. Rex had been riding solo that night, heading home from his construction job, when he heard Tommy's distress call. Over the radio, the smart play would have been to call for backup and wait. Rex was just a prospect then, not even a full member. But Tommy was family, and family didn't wait for backup when family was dying. Rex had arrived at that alley like a hurricane in leather and chrome. He'd waded into 4 seasoned fighters with nothing but his fists and the kind of fury that comes from knowing your brothers are worth dying for. When the dust settled, Tommy was alive. The rival club members were broken and bloody, and Rex had earned his place in Bone Valley MC forever. Sometimes you don't get to choose your battles, Miguel had said after that night, treating Rex's split knuckles and cracked ribs in their kitchen. But when the battle chooses you, you fight with everything you have. That's what makes you different from the animals, mijo. You fight for something bigger than yourself. Now, walking through hell with 5 lives hanging in the balance, Rex understood his father's words with crystal clarity. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about proving that the code meant something. That brotherhood extended beyond club colors to anyone who needed protection. Mile 6 brought new challenges. The landscape began to rise, forcing Rex to climb over rocky outcroppings that turned his hands bloody despite the tape wrapping. Loose shale slid underfoot, threatening to send him tumbling into crevices filled with shadows and scorpions. His water was down to a quarter bottle, but he couldn't think about that now. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. The hallucinations started around mile 7. At first, it was just movement in his peripheral vision, shadows that shouldn't be there, shapes that disappeared when he turned to look directly. Rex recognized the signs from stories other members had told about bad drug experiences or extreme exhaustion. His brain was starting to cook in the desert heat, creating phantoms to fill in the gaps where his senses were failing. But then he saw Tommy Martinez walking beside him, clear as day, wearing the same bloody shirt from that night in Riverside. "In 10 years ago, you're losing it, hermano," Tommy said, his voice carrying perfectly despite the wind. "This desert's gonna kill you, just like it killed those Apache warriors who thought they were tougher than the sun." "You're not real," Rex said. Aloud, his voice a croak in the dry air. Tommy laughed. "Real enough. Question is, what you gonna do when you can't tell the difference anymore? When you start walking in circles because you think you see roads that ain't there?" Rex stopped walking and closed his eyes, counting his heartbeat for 30 seconds. When he opened them, Tommy was gone, but the question remained. The desert was already playing tricks with his mind, and he still had more than 10 miles to go. He checked his makeshift compass, a needle magnetized against his belt buckle, and floated in a bottle cap of precious water. Still heading south, still on track. The sun had passed its peak and was beginning its slow descent toward the western mountains, but the temperature hadn't dropped a single degree. Rex took a careful sip of water and began walking again. The next few hours would determine whether he was a hero or just another set of bones bleaching in the Arizona sun. Behind him, 5 people were running out of time. Ahead of him, the desert stretched endlessly toward an uncertain salvation. But Rex Ironside Castellano kept walking, because that's what brothers do. Mile 12 nearly killed him. Rex collapsed face first into the sand, his legs finally giving out after hours of punishment. The sun had shifted west, but lost none of its fury, and his water bottle had been empty for the last 2 miles. His tongue felt like leather in his mouth, and every breath was a struggle against air so dry it seemed to steal moisture directly from his lungs. The hallucinations were getting worse. Miguel kept appearing, sometimes walking alongside him, sometimes sitting on rocks that weren't there. His father would offer advice in Spanish, then fade away like smoke when Rex tried to respond. Worse were the visions of the crash survivors, Lisa screaming his name, Captain Sullivan's eyes growing glassy with death, Marcus taking his final breath in the shadow of the wreckage. "Get up, mijo," Miguel's voice whispered from somewhere behind him. "You don't die in the sand like an animal. You die on your feet like a man." Rex pressed his palms against the burning sand and forced himself upright. His vision swam, and for a moment he couldn't tell which way was south anymore. The sun was a merciless hammer against his skull, and his dislocated shoulder had gone completely numb, which was somehow worse than the pain had been. That's when he saw the fence. At first, Rex thought it was another hallucination. A simple, barbed wire fence stretching east and west across his path, with weathered wooden posts every 20 yards. But when he stumbled forward and touched it, the wire was real, solid, cutting slightly into his fingers. Fences meant property. Property meant people. Following the fence line west, Rex's boots found a dirt track that might generously be called a road. 2 tire ruts carved into hardpan, meandering through the scrub toward distant mountains. His training kicked in, always follow roads, no matter how rough. Roads led to civilization, even if that civilization was just a single trailer house with a working phone. The road curved around a low hill, and Rex saw something that stopped him cold. a thin column of smoke rising against the blue sky. Not the black smoke of emergency, but the grey-white smoke of a cooking fire or wood stove. Someone was home. Rex tried to run but managed only a shambling walk that would have been embarrassing if anyone had been watching. The road led him around another bend, and there it was, a small adobe house with a corrugated metal roof surrounded by a few outbuildings and a garden that looked impossible in this wasteland. An old pickup truck sat in whatever shade the house provided, and clothes hung motionless on a line strung between two posts. He made it halfway across the yard before his legs gave out again. This time, he didn't have the strength to get back up. Rex crawled the last 20 feet to the front door, his leather jacket shredding against rocks and thorns, and managed to pound weakly against the weathered wood. "Help," he croaked, his voice barely audible even to himself. "Please. Help." The door opened to reveal a woman in her 50s with steel-grey hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes the color of desert sage. She took one look at Rex, leather jacket torn, face bloody, lips cracked and white with dehydration, and her expression shifted from caution to alarm. "Dios mío," she whispered, then louder. "¿Qué pasó? What happened to you?" Rex tried to speak, but only managed a whisper. "Plane, crash, people dying." The woman, Maria Santos, though Rex wouldn't learn her name for several more minutes, reacted with the quick efficiency of someone who'd lived in the desert long enough to recognize a genuine emergency. She grabbed Rex under his good arm and helped him into the house, settling him in a chair at her kitchen table. "Drink," she commanded, pressing a glass of water into his shaking hands. "Slowly. Too much too fast and you'll vomit it back up." Rex had never tasted anything more beautiful than that first sip of cool water. It was life itself flowing back into his parched body, and he had to force himself to follow her instructions and drink slowly when every instinct screamed to drain the glass in seconds. Maria bustled around her small kitchen, filling another glass, dampening a towel with cool water for his forehead. But Rex noticed she kept glancing at his jacket, at the torn patches and club colors that marked him as Bone Valley MC. Her movements were helpful but wary, like someone who'd learned to be careful around dangerous men. A plane crashed, Rex managed after finishing the first glass of water. 20 miles north of here, maybe more. 5 people still alive, but barely. They need medical help now, or they're going to die. Maria's eyes widened. "Quando? When did this happen?" "This morning. I've been walking all day." Rex looked at the fading sunlight through her window and realized with shock that he'd been walking for nearly 8 hours. "How far am I from the main road, from a phone?" "The highway is 15 miles east," Maria said, already moving toward an old rotary phone mounted on her kitchen wall. She lifted the receiver, and Rex's heart sank at her expression. "Línea muerta," the phone lines. "Been down since the storm last week." Rex felt despair creeping in. He'd walked 12 miles through hell, only to find help that couldn't help. But Maria was already thinking ahead, moving with the purposeful energy of someone who'd solved problems in isolation before. "My truck," she said. "We take my truck to the highway, flag down help. But first, you need more water and something to eat, or you'll collapse before we get there." She pressed another glass of water into his hands and began assembling what looked like a care package. More water bottles, jerky, fruit, a first aid kit that looked well used. Rex watched her work and felt something shift in his chest. This woman didn't know him from Adam, had every reason to be frightened of a blood-covered biker stumbling onto her property. But she was preparing to risk her own safety to help strangers she'd never met. "Why?" Rex asked quietly. "You don't know me? Don't know them? Why help?" Maria paused in her preparations and looked at him with eyes that held depths of experience he could only guess at. "Because in the desert we are all each other has. Your club colors, my nationality, their money, none of that matters when death comes calling. We help because we are human, and humans help each other survive." Rex stared at this woman who'd just articulated the Brotherhood code better than most Bone Valley members could, and realized that salvation sometimes came from the most unexpected places. "What's your name?" he asked. "Maria Santos. And you are?" "Rex Castellano. And Maria, you just saved 6 lives." She smiled for the first time since opening her door. "We haven't saved anyone yet, Rex Castellano, but we will." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maria's pickup truck was a 20-year-old Ford that had seen better decades, but it started on the first try and rumbled with the confidence of machinery that had been properly maintained. Rex climbed into the passenger seat, his body screaming protests after 12 miles of desert walking, but his mind clearer than it had been since the crash. Hope was a powerful medicine. "The highway patrol station is in Copper Ridge," Maria explained as they bounced down her dirt road toward the main highway. 25 miles from here, but they have helicopters, medical teams. If your people are still alive, that's their best chance." Rex nodded, calculating times in his head. The crash had happened almost 10 hours ago. Captain Sullivan and Lisa had been conscious when he left, but Marcus and Elena had been in critical condition. Every minute they delayed could be the difference between life and death. The truck's radio crackled with static as they reached the highway, and Maria tuned it to the emergency frequency. Nothing but empty air and distant transmissions from truckers heading east toward Phoenix. Rex pulled out his cell phone, miraculously still intact despite the crash and his desert trek, and found a single bar of service. He dialed 911 with hands that still shook from dehydration. "This is Yuma County Emergency Services," the dispatcher answered. "What's your emergency?" "This is Rex Castellano. I'm a survivor of a plane crash in the Sonoran desert, approximately 20 miles northeast of Maria Santos's property on Desert View Road. We have 5 critically injured survivors who need immediate medical evacuation." The dispatcher's voice sharpened with professional focus. "Can you provide more specific coordinates, sir?" Rex looked at Maria, who was already pulling a GPS unit from her glove compartment. 33 degrees, 15 minutes north, 114 degrees, 8 minutes west, she read off. "Give or take half a mile, the wreckage should be visible from the air." "We're dispatching emergency units now," the dispatcher confirmed. "How many casualties total?" 6 dead on impact, 5 survivors including myself. I walked out for help, but the others, they were in bad shape when I left them. That was 8 hours ago. Rex heard keyboard clicks in the background. "Sir, are you Rex Castellano, member of Bone Valley Motorcycle Club?" The question caught Rex off guard. "Yes, but I don't see how." "That's your club president Dutch Hawkins called in a missing person report 3 hours ago. Said you missed a mandatory meeting and weren't answering your phone. We have units looking for you." Despite everything, Rex felt a warmth in his chest. Dutch and the brothers had been worried about him, had called in the cavalry when he didn't. Show up for church. That was the code in action. Nobody rode alone, even when they were flying instead of riding. "Tell Dutch I'm alive and coordinating rescue efforts," Rex said. "And dispatch those helicopters now." The next 2 hours blurred. Together, in a frenzy of activity, Rex and Maria met the highway patrol at their Copper Ridge station, where Rex gave a detailed briefing to the search and rescue coordinator. Maps were spread across tables, flight paths plotted, medical teams assembled. 2 helicopters lifted, off into the desert twilight, their searchlights cutting through the darkness like mechanical angels. Rex wanted to go with them, but the flight medic took one look at his condition and declared him unfit for rescue operations. "You've got severe dehydration, possible concussion, and that shoulder needs immediate attention," the medic said firmly. "You've done your part, sir. Let us do ours." So Rex waited, pacing the station parking lot despite Maria's efforts to get him to sit down. His cell phone rang at 9:47 p.m. "Rex," Dutch Hawkins' voice boomed through the speaker. "Brother, we heard about the crash. You okay?" "I'm alive," Rex replied. "But we've got people in the air right now trying to save the others. Dutch, I need the club's help." "Name it." "Medical bills. These people are going to need surgeries, extended care, rehabilitation. Most of them probably don't have insurance. That'll cover helicopter rescues and trauma surgery." There was a pause. "Rex, you know the club's not exactly flush with charity money. Then we make it flush. We do fundraisers, bike runs, whatever it takes. These people," Rex's voice caught, "Dutch, they didn't deserve what happened to them. And if the situations were reversed, I'd want someone to help us." Another pause, then Dutch's laugh, rough but warm. "Damn, brother, your old man would be proud. You got it. Bone Valley MC will take care of them." At 10:23 p.m., the first helicopter radioed back. "We have the crash site. 4 survivors located, all alive but critical. Initiating medical evacuation now." Rex felt his knees buckle with relief. 4 alive. Someone hadn't made it. Probably Marcus, whose internal injuries had looked the worst, but 4 people were going home to their families because he'd walked 20 miles through hell. The helicopters arrived at Copper Ridge Regional Hospital. 45 minutes later, Rex watched the medical teams wheel the survivors into the emergency room. Captain Sullivan conscious and talking, Lisa Park crying but alert, Elena Santos finally awake and asking for her family. Marcus Webb had died during the afternoon, his body recovered for his family to bury with dignity. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the trauma surgeon, found Rex in the waiting room at midnight. "The pilot has a severe concussion and 3 broken ribs, but he'll make a full recovery. The teacher has a compound fracture that'll require surgery, but no permanent damage. The social worker has a brain bleed, but we caught it in time. They're all going to live, Mr. Castellano." Rex closed his eyes and said a prayer of thanks to whatever gods watch over desert wanderers and broken airplanes. "Doctor," he said quietly, "whatever their medical bills come out to, send them to Dutch Hawkins at Bone Valley Motorcycle Club. We'll cover it." Dr. Harper raised an eyebrow. "That's going to be substantial. Helicopter transport alone is $50,000 per patient." "Then it's substantial," Rex replied. "Their family now." Maria Santos, who had stayed with him through the entire ordeal, took his hand. "Your father would be proud," she said softly. Rex nodded, thinking of Miguel's final words. "Sometimes the code asks you to live for others." He understood now. The code wasn't just about protecting your brothers in the club, it was about protecting anyone who needed protection, regardless of their colors, their background, or whether you'd ever see them again. 3 people were alive, because Rex Castellano had walked through the desert, when walking meant dying, and somehow that made all the pain worth it. The news crews arrived at Copper Ridge Regional Hospital by dawn, drawn by the story that was already spreading across Arizona. A Hells Angels member had walked 20 miles through the desert to save plane crash survivors. Rex woke up in a hospital bed. The doctors had insisted on keeping him overnight for IV fluids and observation, to find a reporter and cameraman standing in his doorway. "Mr. Castellano, I'm Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. Can you tell us about your heroic walk through the desert?" Rex sat up slowly, his shoulder immobilized in a proper sling now, his head still pounding but clear. "Wasn't heroic," he said, quietly. "Was just what needed doing." But the media had already decided on their narrative. By noon, Rex's story was trending on social media. Desert Angel, Yashta Biker Hero, Walk for Life. The contrast was irresistible to journalists. A leather-clad Hells Angels member risking his life to save strangers, challenging every stereotype about motorcycle clubs. Dutch Hawkins arrived at the hospital with 6 other Bone Valley members, their bikes rumbling into the parking lot like rolling thunder. Rex expected them to be uncomfortable with the media attention, but Dutch surprised him. "This is good for the club," Dutch said, settling his considerable bulk into a visitor's chair. "People see us as outlaws and criminals. Now they see us as brothers who protect people." "It's not about publicity," Rex protested. "No, but publicity helps," Dutch replied with a grin. "Easier to raise money for medical bills when people think we're heroes instead of villains." Dutch was right about the money. Within 48 hours of the story breaking, donations were pouring in from unexpected sources. Other motorcycle clubs across the Southwest, even rival clubs, sent contributions. Local businesses in Copper Ridge and Tucson offered discounts on everything from medical equipment to rehabilitation services. A crowdfunding page set up by one of the Bone Valley members raised $50,000 in the first week. But it was the personal visits that mattered most to Rex. Captain Ray Sullivan was the first survivor he saw. The pilot was sitting up, in bed, his head wrapped in bandages, but his eyes sharp and grateful. "Son," he said when Rex entered his room, "I've been flying for 30 years, and I've never seen courage like what you showed out there." "Just did what anyone would do," Rex replied, uncomfortable with the praise. Sullivan shook his head. "No, son. Most people would have died with us. You chose to live for us. There's a difference." Lisa Park was harder to visit. The young teacher was facing months of physical therapy for her leg, and the psychological trauma of the crash had hit her hard. She broke down crying when Rex entered her room. "I thought you were going to die out there," she sobbed. "I thought we were all going to die, and it would be my fault somehow." Rex pulled a chair close to her bed. "Lisa, look at me. None of this was your fault. Planes crash. It's terrible and random and unfair, but it's not your fault, and you didn't give up in that wreckage. You stayed strong, kept the others calm. That took real courage. I was terrified the whole time." "Being brave doesn't mean not being scared," Rex said, echoing something Miguel had told him years ago. "It means being scared and doing what's right anyway." Elena Santos, no relation to Maria despite the shared surname, was the most seriously injured survivor, but also the most resilient. The social worker had worked with trauma victims for 15 years, and she understood better than most what Rex had risked for them. "You know what the statistical survival rate is for someone walking 20 miles through desert heat?" she asked when Rex visited her in the ICU. "Probably don't want to know," Rex admitted. "Less than 15%, and that's for someone who's prepared with proper equipment and full water supplies." Eleanor studied him with professional interest. "What made you think you could beat those odds?" Rex thought about it for a long moment. "Didn't think about odds, just thought about you folks dying if I didn't try." "That's what makes you different from most people," Elena said softly. "Most people calculate risks. You calculated responsibility." The most unexpected visit came from Marcus Webb's widow, Sarah. The rancher's wife drove down from Flagstaff 3 days after the rescue, a small woman in her 60s with steel in her spine and grief in her eyes. "I wanted to thank you," she said simply when she found Rex in the hospital cafeteria. "Ma'am, I'm sorry I couldn't—" "Stop!" Her voice was firm but kind. "Marcus was dying when you left him. The internal bleeding, the damage to his organs, the doctors confirmed he wouldn't have survived even if you'd gotten help there in the first hour. But because of what you did, I got his body back. I can bury my husband properly, say goodbye. That matters more than you know." Rex felt tears he hadn't expected. "I should have been able to save him." Sarah Webb took his hand in both of hers. "Son, you saved 4 people by walking through hell. Don't you dare apologize for not performing miracles too." That evening, Dutch found Rex on the hospital's outdoor patio, staring at the desert sunset. The older biker settled beside him on a bench, offering a beer that somehow hadn't been confiscated by hospital security. "Been thinking about what you did out there," Dutch said after a comfortable silence. "Yeah? Your old man, Miguel, He was never officially a member, but he lived by the code better than most patched members I've known. Looks like he taught you well. Rex thought about his father's funeral 3 months ago, how empty the world had felt. Without Miguel's steady presence, feel like I'm finally understanding what he tried to teach me. Code's not just about protecting your brothers in the club, Dutch continued. It's about being the kind of man who protects anyone who needs protecting. What you did out there, that's what we're supposed to be about. Dutch pulled out a folded piece of leather, a new patch, different from the standard Bone Valley colors. It read, Road Guardian, in bold letters, with a desert scene and the coordinates of the crash site embroidered below. Club voted unanimous, Dutch said. You're the first to wear this. Maybe the only one ever will. It means you've walked through fire for people who couldn't walk themselves. Rex stared at the patch, understanding its significance. This wasn't just recognition, it was responsibility. The club was acknowledging that some bonds went deeper than membership. Some codes transcended colors and territory. Thank you, brother, Rex said quietly. Thank you for showing us who we're supposed to be, Dutch replied. As the sun set over the desert that had tested him and forged him, Rex Castellano realized that walking 20 miles through hell had changed. More than just 4 lives. It had changed what it meant to be Bone Valley MC. The Brotherhood was bigger now, wide enough to include anyone willing to walk through fire for strangers. 2 weeks after the rescue, Rex drove his Harley out to Maria Santos's homestead. His shoulder was still healing, making the ride uncomfortable, but he needed to see her again. The woman who had saved his life, and by extension, the lives of 4 crash survivors, had refused all media interviews and quietly disappeared from the public story. Maria was in her garden when he arrived, tending to tomatoes and peppers that seemed to thrive despite the harsh desert conditions. She looked up at the sound of his motorcycle and smiled, wiping her hands on a faded apron. Rex Castellano, she said warmly, I wondered when you would come back. Had to thank you properly, Rex replied, cutting the engine. Without you, those people would have died. Without you walking 20 miles, I never would have known they needed help, Maria countered. We saved them together. She led him into her small house, and Rex noticed details he'd missed during his desperate arrival 2 weeks earlier. Family photos lined the mantelpiece. Children and grandchildren, weddings and graduations, a life fully lived. A Purple Heart sat in a place of honor next to a photograph of a young man in army dress uniform. My son Carlos, Maria explained, following his gaze. Killed in Afghanistan 7 years ago. He was a medic, always said his job was to bring people home. Rex felt a familiar weight in his chest. I'm sorry. Losing a child changes everything. Maria finished quietly. Makes you understand that life is precious and brief, and we have an obligation to protect it whenever we can. She made coffee, and they sat at her kitchen table, the same table where Rex had first tasted salvation in the form of cool water. Outside the windows, the desert stretched endlessly, beautiful and terrible under the afternoon sun. Can I ask? You something, Rex said after a comfortable silence. Of course. Why do you live out here? 20 miles from the nearest neighbor. No phone service, no easy way to get help if something goes wrong. Maria's smile held depths of memory. My husband brought me here 35 years ago. Said the desert would teach us who we really were. Strip away all the unnecessary things and show us what mattered. He died 10 years ago, heart attack. But I stayed because he was right. What did it teach you? That we are all connected, even when we feel most alone. The desert seems empty, but it's full of life if you know how to look. Animals help each other survive out here. Coyotes and ravens work together to hunt. Different species share water sources during droughts. Humans are no different. We survive by helping each other, or we don't survive at all. Rex thought about his father, about the Brotherhood Code, about 4 strangers whose lives had become intertwined with his in the span of a single day. My dad used to say something similar, that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves. Your father. Sounds like a wise man? He was. Died 3 months before the crash. Cancer. Maria reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. I'm sorry. Losing a parent is like losing your anchor to the past. Feel like I've been drifting since he died, Rex admitted. Like I lost my purpose when I lost him. And now? Rex looked out at the desert, thinking about Lisa Park's tears of gratitude, Captain Sullivan's firm handshake, Elena Santos's professional assessment of his impossible odds. Now I think maybe I found it again. Maria nodded knowingly. Carlos used to write me letters from Afghanistan. In one of them, he said that saving lives wasn't about being a hero. It was about being useful. Being there when people needed someone to be there. Sounds like a smart kid. He was, and he would have been proud of what you did out there. They spent the afternoon talking about family, about loss, about the strange ways life connects people who seem to have nothing in common. Maria told him about her late husband's work as a park ranger, about raising Carlos as a single mother after her husband's death, about the quiet satisfaction of living simply in a complicated world. Rex found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone, his fears about following his father's example, his struggles with anger in his younger years, his love for the brotherhood that had given him purpose and direction. Maria listened without judgment, offering the kind of understanding that comes from having lived through her own share of pain and growth. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Maria walked him out to his motorcycle. Rex, she said as he prepared to leave, I want you to know something. What you did, walking through the desert to save those people, that wasn't just courage. That was love. Love for strangers. Love for life itself. That's the most powerful force in the world. Don't feel very loving most of the time, Rex admitted. Feel angry a lot, frustrated, like the world's full of people who don't care about each other. The world is full of those people, Maria agreed. But it's also full of people like you, like Carlos, like your father, people who choose to care even when it's hard, even when it hurts. You walked 20 miles through hell for strangers. That's love in action. Rex started his motorcycle, the familiar rumble settling something in his chest. Maria, if you ever need anything, anything at all, you call Bone Valley MC. You're a family now. And if you ever need reminding of who you really are, she replied, you come back to the desert. It remembers heroes, Rex Castellano, and it doesn't forget them. As Rex rode back toward Tucson, the desert wind carrying the scent of sage and possibility, he realized that his father's death hadn't ended anything. It had begun something new, an understanding that love and brotherhood weren't limited by blood, or patches, or geography. Miguel had taught him to live by the code. Maria had shown him that the code was bigger than he'd ever imagined. The desert had tested him and found him worthy. Now it was time to see what else life might ask of him, and what other strangers might need someone to walk through fire for them. 6 months after Flight 447 went down in the Sonoran desert, Rex Castellano stood before a crowd of 500 people at the Arizona State Fairgrounds. The second annual Desert Guardian Memorial Run had drawn motorcycle clubs from across the Southwest. Not just Hell's Angels chapters, but bandidos, Mongols, even independent riders who'd never worn club colors, all united by a simple idea. When people need help, you help them. The memorial run raised money for emergency medical services in rural areas, funding helicopter fuel and desert rescue equipment that could mean the difference between life and death for future crash survivors. But it had become something more than a fundraiser. It had become a celebration of what people could accomplish when they chose to walk through fire for strangers. Rex adjusted the microphone at the podium, looking out at faces that represented Every demographic Arizona had to offer. Bikers in leather sat next to suburban families. Police officers shared tables with former inmates. Maria Santos sat in the front row, wearing a Bone Valley MC support shirt that Dutch had made specially for her. "Most of you know the story," Rex began, his voice carrying clearly across the crowd. "Plane crashed, I walked for help, we saved some lives. Media called it heroic. Truth is, it was just Tuesday." A ripple of laughter moved through the audience. "But I learned something out there in the desert," Rex continued. "I learned that brotherhood isn't about patches or colors or who you ride with. It's about who you're willing to walk through hell for. And sometimes that's people you've never met. People who don't look like you or believe what you believe, or live the way you live." Captain Ray Sullivan was in the crowd, fully recovered and back to flying. Lisa Park had driven down from Phoenix, where she was teaching again and walking without a limp. Elena Santos had brought her family from Flagstaff, including her teenage daughter, who wore a Desert Guardian t-shirt with pride. "My father used to tell me that the code asks you to live for others," Rex said. "I thought that meant just my brothers, in the club. But the desert taught me different. The code asks you to live for anyone who needs someone to live for them." Rex gestured toward a group of young people sitting near the back, teenagers from the Phoenix group home, where he'd been volunteering, kids who'd aged out of foster care and were learning to navigate the world without family support. 6 months ago, I walked 20 miles to save 4 lives. But those 4 lives saved me right back. They showed me that being useful, being there when people need someone to be there, that's not just something you do. It's who you are. The crowd was silent now, 500 people hanging on words from a man who'd never thought of himself as a speaker. "Today, we ride for everyone who's ever been alone in their desert," Rex said. "Everyone who's ever needed someone to walk through. Fire for them, everyone who's ever been that person willing to walk. We ride because we're all connected, even when we feel most alone." Rex stepped back from the microphone as the crowd erupted in applause. Dutch Hawkins took the stage to announce the ride route, but Rex barely heard him. He was thinking about Miguel, wondering if his father would be proud of the man his son had become. An hour later, 500 motorcycles rolled out of the fairgrounds in perfect formation. Rex rode point alongside Dutch, but the real leaders were spread throughout the group. Captain Sullivan on a new Harley he'd bought after his recovery, Maria Santos riding passenger behind one of the Bone Valley members, Lisa Park on a Honda, that she'd learned to ride specifically for this event. The route took them past the crash site, now marked with a small memorial that listed the names of the 6 people who'd died and the 4 who'd lived. Rex had visited the site dozens of times over the past 6 months, sometimes alone, sometimes with other survivors, always with a sense of connection to something larger than himself. As they rode deeper into the desert, Rex felt the familiar peace that came from chrome and asphalt and the brotherhood of the road. But it was different now, bigger, more inclusive. The Desert Guardian patch on his jacket wasn't just recognition for something he'd done once. It was a promise about who he would always be. His phone buzzed with a text message. Rex pulled over at the next rest stop and checked it, smiling when he saw it was from Elena Santos. "Just got called to a car accident on I-10. EMTs said they had everything under control, but asked if I knew any bikers who might want to help direct traffic while they worked. Told them I knew exactly who to call." Rex showed the message to Dutch, who grinned and fired up his bike. "Well, brother," Dutch said, "looks like the desert's calling again." 20 minutes later, Rex and a dozen Bone Valley members were at the accident scene, their bikes positioned to protect the EMTs while they worked. It wasn't dramatic, no 20-mile walks or life-or-death decisions, just people helping people, because that's what people do. That evening, back at Maria's homestead, Rex sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors. Maria brought him coffee and settled into the chair beside him. "Your father would be proud," she said quietly. "Think so." "I know so." You've become the man he raised you to be. Someone who lives for others. Someone who makes the world better. By being in it, Rex thought about the teenagers at the group home who now had motorcycles to work on and older bikers to mentor them. About the emergency medical fund that had already helped 3 families with helicopter transport costs. About the way rival motorcycle clubs now work together on charity rides instead of fighting over territory. Miguel used to say that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves, Rex said. I think I finally understand what he meant. What's that? We're part of each other's stories. The people on that plane, you, the kids at the group home, everyone we helped today, we're all connected. What happens to one of us happens to all of us. As stars began to appear in the clear desert sky, Rex Castellano understood that his real journey had started the moment he'd decided to walk into the desert for strangers. Everything since then, the rescue, the recognition, the new purpose, was just him living up to the promise he'd made that day. Some people spend their whole lives looking for their purpose. Rex had found his 20 miles into the desert. One step at a time, walking toward people who needed someone to walk toward them. The desert had taught him who he really was. Now it was up to him to keep being that person, 1 mile at a time, for as long as the road would have him. In the end, that was all the code really asked. Be useful. Be there when people need someone to be there, and never stop walking toward the people who need you to walk toward them. Rex, Ironside, Castellano, Road Guardian, Bone Valley MC understood that now, and he would never forget it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.